It was one of those late afternoons when the house felt too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you suddenly aware of every sound. Your own breath, the hum of the fridge, the creak in the hallway you always forget is there. I had just curled up on the couch with a cup of tea, trying to unwind, when my phone lit up with an unknown number. I hesitated. Normally, I'd let it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. Maybe it was instinct, maybe boredom. Either way, I swiped. "Hello?" I said cautiously. The voice on the other end caught me off guard. It was soft, timid almost. "Hi. Is this Elena?" She sounded like she was walking on emotional eggshells, like she was scared to speak but couldn't stay silent. I didn't recognize the voice, but something about her tone pulled at me. It wasn't a stranger's voice. It was someone who knew exactly who I was, and that made my heart skip. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she continued, her voice trembling. "For everything. I hope someday you can forgive me." Forgive her? For what? My stomach tightened. I sat up, tea forgotten, every sense on high alert. "Forgive you. For what?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. That's when I heard it, the sudden panic in her breath, the hesitation. Then came the words that cracked my world open. "Wait, he didn't tell you?" There was a silence so sharp it felt like it cut through the phone line. My throat went dry. I didn't know this woman, but I could hear the weight in her pause, like she'd just realized she'd said too much. Then she spoke again, her words coming fast, nervous, like she was trying to backpedal but also couldn't hold it in anymore. "I thought you knew. We've been seeing each other again. For a while. I swear I didn't mean for it to happen like this." Seeing each other again. That sentence echoed through my chest like a dropped glass shattering in slow motion. Rachel. The name hit me all at once. David's ex. The one he never really talked about, but who used to leave little pieces of herself in our conversations. And now she was on the phone with me, apologizing. For what exactly? For slipping back into my husband's life? For thinking I knew and just lived with it? My whole body went still. Not the kind of stillness that comes from calm, but the kind that comes right before the storm. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just sat there, the phone pressed to my ear, and let her keep talking. She rambled on, saying she didn't mean to cross any lines, that it just happened, that David always said things were complicated between us. My jaw clenched. My fingers gripped the edge of the couch cushion. Complicated? No, complicated as burnt toast. This was betrayal, and it had a voice now. I let her talk until she ran out of breath, until the apology started looping, becoming less about remorse and more about guilt. And when she finally said, "I didn't mean to hurt you," I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. I didn't even know I was bleeding until she called. And now that I knew, I couldn't stop the flood of questions racing through my mind like wildfire. How long? Where? How dare he? But I didn't say any of that. I just said, "Thanks for letting me know," and hung up. My hands were shaking, but my face was still. Completely still. I stared at the screen until it faded to black, then sat in the kind of silence that comes when something breaks inside you, and you're the only one who hears it. No tears yet, no yelling. Just the eerie calm of a woman who's just had the ground pulled from beneath her and is already planning where to land. Because here's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't always burn. Sometimes it freezes. And in that frozen moment, something inside me shifted. Not just hurt, not just heartbreak. Something sharper. I looked around our living room, the one I decorated, the one we built together, and I realized I didn't feel at home anymore. But I wasn't leaving. Not yet. Not without a plan. I didn't sleep that night. I don't even remember blinking. I just sat in bed, staring at the ceiling while David snored softly beside me, completely unaware that I knew. I listened to the rhythm of his breath, steady and content, like he hadn't detonated a bomb in the middle of our life. Every once in a while, he'd shift in his sleep, maybe even reach for me. And I'd lie perfectly still, wondering how many nights he'd done the same after being with her. By morning, something in me had hardened. Not in a bitter way, more like clarity, like a fog had lifted and I could finally see the outline of the truth. It was there all along, I realized. I just didn't want to connect the dots. The late meetings, the last-minute errands that took all day. The way he suddenly started turning his phone face down, like it had become radioactive. God, I had felt it, but I kept brushing it off, because love makes you generous with your doubt. So I started retracing everything, every strange moment, every excuse I swallowed whole. My mind became a reel of flashbacks, him coming home with damp hair but no gym bag, the mysterious charges on our joint card he claimed were work expenses, that new watch he said a client gave him, but never wore again. It was all right there, waiting for me to stop pretending, and now I wasn't pretending anymore. That afternoon, when David walked through the front door, it was like watching a stranger in my husband's skin. Same smile, same keys jingling, same casual kiss on the cheek. But I didn't feel the kiss. I didn't even flinch. I just smiled back, sweet and warm, like nothing in the world had changed. Because to him, nothing had. And that's when I realized I had the advantage now. He thought I was still in the dark. He had no idea I was already walking through the fire, without making a sound. I played the role effortlessly, asked him about his day, laughed at the right moments, even made his favorite dinner, chicken piccata, lemony and perfect. The same meal I made the night he told me he wanted to reconnect. I watched him eat, watched the man I used to love, and all I could think was, you're still lying with food in your mouth. It was a strange thing, sitting across from someone who didn't know they'd already lost you. Later that night, while he showered, I opened our shared banking app. I'd looked at it 100 times before, but this time, I wasn't glancing. I was studying. Hotel charges in Rachel's neighborhood, a jewelry store receipt from 3 weeks ago, and me? I never saw a box, not even a bow. My pulse didn't even rise. I just stared at the numbers like they were coordinates, plotting a map. Not of his betrayal, but of my escape. He came to bed humming that same tune he always does when he's had wine. Rolled over, pulled me close, kissed my shoulder. I let him. I even whispered, "Good night." And as he drifted off beside me, I stared into the dark with my eyes wide open, not thinking about her, but about me. About how much of myself I'd handed over across the years, piece by piece, without even realizing. And now, the only thing I wanted was to take it all back. It wasn't rage I felt. Not yet. It was something colder, more deliberate, a kind of calm that scared me a little, because it didn't come with tears or screaming. It came with silence, the kind of silence you hear in the eye of a storm, right before the sky rips open. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to confront. I was going to outthink him, outpace him. I'd spent years nurturing this home, this life. And now, I'd use that same energy to dismantle it, strategically, and on my terms. The next morning, I brewed his coffee, kissed his cheek, and told him to have a good day at work. And as the door closed behind him, I stood there barefoot in our kitchen, surrounded by the scent of cinnamon toast and betrayal. And I thought to myself, this is the last time I play the fool. Not because I didn't love him, but because I finally remembered I loved myself more. The first thing I did was buy a new journal, one he'd never see. I wrote everything down. Dates, transactions. Things he said that didn't line up. The voice recorder app on my phone became my shadow. I played Rachel's call back more times than I'd admit. Not to torture myself, but to memorize her pauses, her nervous breath, the way guilt soaked through every syllable. It wasn't just evidence, it was fuel. And I was done running on fumes. I went through our phone records line by line, his call history, his texts, the numbers he deleted but forgot were still backed up in our cloud. There she was, Rachel, sometimes saved under fake names like Jim's Car Wash or Vet Apt. Creative, pathetic. I screenshotted everything, every sweet nothing, every lie, every missed call at midnight. I wasn't shaking anymore. I wasn't doubting myself. I was building my case like a woman who'd been underestimated one time too many. Then came the lawyer. I didn't want a messy divorce. I wanted a clean one, with sharp edges. She was a woman around my age, fierce and calm, and the moment I told her the story, she just nodded like she'd heard it all before. Maybe she had, but this was my story now, and I wanted to own every page of it. We mapped out the steps: asset protection, property strategy. I learned terms I never thought I'd need, like marital equity and custodial leverage. And I sat through it all with a steady smile, thinking, he has no idea what's coming. Every day after that felt like a quiet rehearsal. I'd make breakfast, fold laundry, smile at his texts. I kissed him goodbye, knowing I was planning our final act behind that same front door. And there was something strangely empowering about it. Not in a cruel way, but in a clarifying one. For so long, I thought love meant sacrifice. Now I understood it also meant boundaries. And his betrayal? That was the final permission I didn't even know I needed. I started organizing the paperwork in secret folders, documents, receipts, everything with a date and dollar sign. I even printed a transcript of Rachel's call, labeled it the confession, like some kind of courtroom exhibit. My hands stopped trembling, my spine straightened. I wasn't a wife anymore. I was a strategist, and every lie he told became a building block in the foundation of my freedom. Then I did something that made me feel giddy, dangerously giddy. I invited him to dinner. A romantic night at home, I said. Just the two of us. I even let my voice soften when I asked, like I missed him. He smiled like a man getting away with something, told me he'd bring wine. I nodded sweetly and hung up, heart pounding, not from fear but from anticipation. Because this time I wasn't preparing a meal. I was setting the stage. That day I spent hours preparing everything, not the food, not the candles, but the details. I laid out the evidence in a folder so neat it could have passed for a business proposal. Printed copies, labeled tabs. I even slid in a photo of the necklace I found on the credit card statement, the one he never gave me. It was all there, packaged like a gift he never wanted to open, and I couldn't wait to hand it to him. When I finished, I walked through the house like I was seeing it for the first time. The framed photos, the throw pillows I picked out because he liked them. The scent of his cologne still clinging to the hallway. It all felt like a museum now, an exhibit of a life we curated for the world. But behind the glass it was empty, and that emptiness didn't ache anymore. It motivated me. By the time he texted on my way, I was already dressed. Not just for dinner, for closure. I looked in the mirror and didn't see a broken woman. I saw someone who had finally stopped begging for honesty and started demanding dignity. I poured the wine, lit the candles, and as I heard his keys at the door, I smiled, not because I was happy to see him, but because the curtain was about to rise. He walked in humming, holding a bottle of red in one hand and a guilty smile in the other. "You look beautiful," he said, like the man who still believed I was his. I thanked him sweetly and took the wine, setting it gently on the counter. The table was already set, candles flickering, plates warm, music low. Everything about the room whispered romance. And everything inside me whispered war. We sat down, clinked glasses, and pretended. He talked about work, traffic, something his brother said. I nodded, laughed, asked questions. It was almost surreal, how easy it was to perform beside someone who thought he'd gotten away with it all. And the way he looked at me, like he still had my trust, my heart, my future. That was the part that made me sick. Not the cheating, the comfort he had in my presence. The way he had no idea the ground beneath him was already cracked. I waited until the second glass of wine, until the meal was halfway done. And then, with the calm of a woman rearranging silverware, I looked up and said, "I got the most interesting phone call today." He blinked. I kept going. Someone wanted to apologize. You'll never guess who. His hand froze over his plate. His smile faltered just enough to confirm what I already knew. He'd underestimated me one last time. He opened his mouth to speak, but I was already reaching for my phone. No raised voice, no theatrics. Just a simple tap on the screen and the living room filled with Rachel's voice. Shaky, guilty, real. I thought you knew. We've been seeing each other again. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. Her words hung in the air like smoke. He stared at me like he'd just seen a ghost, like I'd become someone he no longer recognized. He was right. I watched him unravel. First the disbelief, then the panic flickering behind his eyes. He reached for me, tried to talk, but I didn't give him the space. I slid the folder across the table, cool, deliberate, quiet. You'll want a lawyer, I said calmly, like I was recommending a good book. He hesitated before opening it, but when he did, I saw his entire body deflate. Statements, texts, hotel bookings, a full-color map of his cowardice, all neatly arranged between tabs labeled lies, money, and Rachel. He muttered something about making a mistake, about love, about fixing things. I didn't respond. Not because I had nothing to say, but because nothing he said mattered anymore. The man sitting across from me wasn't my husband. He was just the final lesson in a long chapter about self-respect, and I had already turned the page. I stood up slowly, smoothing the fabric of my dress as I pushed my chair back. He was still sitting there, stunned and small, staring down at the evidence like it might rearrange itself if he blinked long enough. She wanted forgiveness, I said, my voice level, almost kind. You'll want a lawyer. And with that, I turned away from the table. From the man, from the life I'd spent years trying to protect while he was off tearing it apart in silence. I didn't slam the door. I didn't throw the wine. I left the room with the same calm he always mistook for weakness. Because I knew now, it wasn't weakness, it was control, it was strength. And nothing I could have screamed would have landed harder than my silence did in that moment. That silence wasn't empty, it was full of choice, my choice. And it echoed behind me louder than any fight ever could. As I walked down the hall, I felt the weight of every lie lift off my shoulders, one by one, like stepping out of a coat I should have taken off years ago. There was grief, sure. But beneath it, something else was rising, something warmer, lighter. I wasn't walking away from a marriage, I was walking back to myself. The days that followed were strangely still. No dramatic phone calls, no desperate knocks at the door, just silence, the kind that feels like clean air after a storm. David tried, of course, a few texts, one long email filled with empty phrases like, I made a mistake, and we can rebuild. But the truth is, I had already started building something else, something better. And it didn't have space for guilt dressed up as love. The fallout was swift. His family knew within days. Turns out, betrayal doesn't stay secret when it's neatly documented in a folder and delivered with wine. Friends who once called us the perfect couple started quietly choosing sides. And Rachel? She vanished the moment she realized she was never the exception, just another name in his little hall of echoes. I didn't chase her. I didn't need to. She gave me the truth, and that truth gave me freedom. I kept the house. He signed it over without much of a fight, maybe out of shame, maybe because he knew I'd win. I didn't care why. I just watched him pack his things like a man who finally saw the damage he'd caused. Not just to me, but to the version of himself he pretended to be. And I felt peace. Real peace. Not the kind you perform for photos or holidays. The kind that fills your lungs when you finally stop begging someone to choose you. I started sleeping better. Not because I wasn't sad, grief still crept in some mornings, uninvited and heavy, but because I didn't have to sleep next to someone who lied through his smile. I woke up without checking a phone for proof. I cooked meals just for myself, exactly how I liked them, with extra garlic and no compromises. And for the first time in years, the house felt like mine, not a stage. Not a story we were faking, just mine. I found joy in the smallest things. A quiet walk without explaining where I was going. Music playing while I danced barefoot in the kitchen. Rearranging the living room. Not to impress, not to match someone else's taste, but just because I wanted change. I lit candles at night with no plans. I poured a glass of wine not out of habit, but out of celebration. Not for him, for me. People asked how I was doing, some with pity, some with too much curiosity. I'd smile and say, I'm okay. But the truth was, I was more than okay. I was healing. Not in a loud, dramatic way, but like a garden slowly blooming after a brutal winter. No one hears the roots digging in deeper, but they do. And mine were finally finding their way back to solid ground. One evening, I sat on the balcony with a glass of wine in hand, wrapped in my favorite blanket, the city glowing quietly below. The air was still, just cool enough to make me feel awake and alive. My phone buzzed once on the table beside me, but I didn't even look at the screen. I didn't need to know who it was. I didn't owe anyone a reply. Not anymore. Silence wasn't empty. It was a gift I'd finally learned to keep for myself. I watched the sun melt behind the skyline, the colors shifting like a soft goodbye. No more pretending. No more waiting for someone else to do right by me. That version of me, the one who made herself small so others could feel big, she didn't live here anymore. In her place was a woman who had walked through betrayal, through the quiet ache of discovery, and come out with her spine straighter than ever. And as I sat there, the warmth of the wine settling into my chest, I thought back to that call, that shaky voice, that unintended truth. It broke something in me, yes, but it also built something new, something stronger, something mine. I took a slow sip, smiled to no one in particular, and whispered, "Funny how one apology gave me everything I needed to let go, for good."